Hey, welcome back to Normalize the Conversation. Today I'm here with Dr. Michelle Chung. Dr. Michelle Chung is a licensed clinical psychologist specializing in anxiety-related mood, ADHD, executive functioning challenges, and building resiliency. She also leads parenting workshops and consults with parents individually. Additionally, she specializes in working with recovering perfectionist types. Using a CBT, DBT, and biofeedback model, Dr. Chung works with youth, families, and adults. Dr. Chung graduated from Carnegie Mellon University and received a doctorate in clinical psychology at Long Island University, CW Post. She's a recipient of numerous fellowship grants. Dr. Chung published articles and book chapters on 9/11 trauma, suicidal ideations, engagement of families, complex trauma, and working with Asian families. Her workshop includes topics on burnout, self-care, parenting, gifted and talented children, ethnic identity development, and resiliency. Additionally, Dr. Chung has a specific interest in promoting mental health awareness within the Asian American community. She speaks annually at the Korean Music, K-pop, and Cultural Festival, KCON. Currently, Dr. Chung heads a boutique group practice in New York City and teaches at Mount Sinai Medical Center. Dr. Chung, thank you so much for joining me today. Let's talk about perfectionism. I am so excited for this topic because, as I've told you, I am a huge perfectionist. I am the person who said, I'm going to graduate undergrad in 2 years. Completely unrealistic perfectionist that pushed myself beyond reasonable limits. So I'm really excited to learn more about why I do this to myself. So before we begin and jump too far in, for those who don't know what perfectionism is, would you mind explaining it?
Sure. And by the way, so many out there, I always say that there are perfectionists that don't even know that they're perfectionists out there. So you are not alone. And, I myself do consider myself a recovering perfectionist. It is, as with most things in life, there are, pros and cons in that. There are some advantages and, also disadvantages, right? The way I look at perfectionism is that, when I come across somebody that feels that most things are not enough, they're not good enough, right? And there's a trouble with tolerating not being perfect, right? And the other sort of trait that I always look for, and I realize it's a kind of like a red flag to me, is that there's this tendency to always think there's more that can be done, always think that there are things that can make it better. And that pull or that urge is so strong that usually, you'll spend an hour revising 2 sentences over and over and over again, right? And the other real, I think, trait of a perfectionist is that when you really dig underneath all of those behaviors and the thoughts, what you really see is really protecting yourself from the pain of feeling shame or judgment, especially negative judgment.
That is so true. And that feeling of not being good enough, I think that was for me that judgment, is I didn't want people to look at me and think that I just wasn't enough. I didn't want people to look down on me. I didn't ever want to be someone who wasn't, I guess enough is really the word. And it is so hard when we don't have conversations about this, because I had no idea what I was doing myself until I had so much anxiety that I was genuinely throwing up blood clots. I was giving myself ulcers because I had to be perfect. I had to get an A on my exams and things that I had never learned before. Coding. I was good at math, but I wasn't good at technology. And being able to combine both of those and form a code was going to be extremely hard for me compared to people who have spent years and did their undergrad in coding. And yet I had to be better than them. So I would make myself physically sick. And I think that when it comes to perfectionists, we don't realize that we are living with perfectionism until it's so far down the line, until the most dramatic things are happening. because it's not included in the DSM.
Right.
So we just don't have these conversations. But
Mhm.
when we first connected, you spoke about how there's two different types of perfectionists. So there's that one group that's determined to succeed, and the second group who's afraid with that fear of failure. So can you talk about both of these?
Sure. I call it sort of like the too much perfectionist and the too little perfectionist, right? So the way I put it is like the ones that are on the too much side, they're the ones that are doing too much, right? They are, I totally hear you. They're doing everything that they can to fit that standard, right? And that perfectionist ideal. And it's almost to the point of inefficiency. It brings way too much stress, and it's too much, right? And in some ways, it's interesting because those high standards are almost motivating for them. It's kind of like, I'm going to keep going because I'm going to get there, right? But it's a moving target the whole time, right? Every time you get close, all of a sudden there's more you can do. And I think the perfectionists that fall more in the doing too little category are really somewhat paralyzed because they are feeling hopeless by those really high standards that are set for either themselves or by other people for them. And so instead of feeling like I'm just going to keep doing, they're frozen in not even being able to start. A great example of this is sometimes I see this, especially, I feel like writing is one of the biggest triggers for perfectionism because, unlike math, where there's a right and a wrong answer that you get to in the end, writing can go on and in terms of improving, endlessly, right? You can always improve a sentence or a paragraph or a wording. So writing, I think, is a trigger for a lot of these perfectionists. And when you see these two types, the too much perfectionist is the one that will spend forever and review a 2-page paper for like 5 days, in order to get it to a point where they feel comfortable submitting it. The doing too little perfectionists are the ones that truly either procrastinate or avoid, and then end up having to hand in the paper late. Or they sit down and don't even know how to start because they feel that need to write the perfect sentence. Their first sentence needs to be perfect. It needs to be worded perfectly, and therefore they can't start. That fear sets in.
It is really fascinating to hear about the two different types because when we do have conversations on perfectionists, it really is that too much. It is that the me who is motivated by having to be perfect and having to go a little bit further than everyone else. But we forget about the people who they're frozen in the fear of not being perfect. So instead of going full force ahead and just pushing and pushing and pushing to make it perfect, they're afraid to start because what if it isn't perfect? What if it isn't right? What if I'm not right? Mm-hmm. And that was a really interesting point of view to learn because I had never seen it that way. But I also really want to talk about how it can become an impairment in our lives. Other than just what we've talked about with the forcing and overworking and the fear of starting, how else can it impact our daily lives?
I think this is a great question because a lot of times, especially when I work with perfectionist type personalities, my clients will say to me, I'm afraid not to be this way, because there's this sense of, this is a part of what motivates me, what helps me be a better version of myself. And if we take this away, then how am I going to do that? I won't be successful. And I think, but the way I look at perfectionism is that it's actually, it locks us in a cage. Right? There's no freedom to make mistakes. There's no freedom for vulnerability. There's no freedom to be able to take chances and, put yourself out there in certain ways. It truly is, it's a cage that we're locked in. And so it really affects multiple layers of our life. It'll affect relationships. It affects work. it affects school. It even affects the way that we parent our children. And so I think, if you were to kind of look at it in the workplace or in school, right, there's this tendency to take too long to get assignments done and be inefficient about your time, or like I said, procrastination and avoidance of tasks. In intimate relationships, I see it a lot where people feel fear of vulnerability. They don't want to be imperfect. They're afraid that the other person might reject them in some way. But the other flip side to it is a perfectionist can also be critical of other people. And sometimes in relationships, that's really hard, because you're so critical of yourself. There's a tendency to also expect other people to be that same way, to be held to that same standard. And obviously that can be tough to be around, in a relationship or friendship. And I think you also see this in athletes or people who, I see it a lot in dancers, especially. Professional athletes are people who are just very serious about their, their physical performance. There's this pushing of there's more that you can do, and there's a competition not only with others, but also within yourself, right? You'll also see this in a person's house, right? Where everything needs to just be perfect. Everything needs to match perfectly. Everything needs to be put in a certain way. And obviously in the end, it would be great if everything in my house looked perfect, but does it really matter? Is it worth all of that stress and extra pressure that's put on yourself? And you also see this in how a person looks or appears. Sometimes people spend way too much time on health and hygiene. Some people will sort of overbrush because they want to, do it perfectly. And then all of a sudden, their enamel on their teeth disappear, or they need to do their makeup perfectly. And so they're spending an hour every day sort of, doing this in a way that is not worth the effort again. Right. And I think sometimes there is also a socially prescribed perfectionism where everyone has to love you, and you have to, be the most likable person in the room, and you have to have the perfect comeback to say in a conversation. And obviously that can lead to social anxiety, right? Because sometimes we blunder in conversations all the time. So it is, there are these sort of increased stress, increase pressure to be a certain way that really doesn't need to be there.
Yeah. First of all, I'm literally just learning so much about myself because this is how I am. And I really love the relationship aspect because, like, I'll use an example, me and my little brother. I am, like I said, I'm over on top of school. And I will study until the last possible second. I will way overstudy because I want to be done with my exam in 2 minutes. Mm-hmm. And I want to be confident in it. Mm-hmm. My younger brother, on the other hand, who's my favorite person in the world, he's so cute. He studies and then he's done. And to me, that's not right.
You're like, what?
How? But he's like, I studied. I know what I'm going to know. Mm-hmm. I'm okay with how my grade turns out because I know I did my best. So I'll sit there and be like, but you need to study more. And I'll get on top of him to keep studying, keep working. Well, did you revise that paper again? Did you look through it again? Versus he's like, no, I did it and I'm done. So the two of us together, it can be really hard. And I didn't realize that is the expectation I have of myself. I project onto other people. So that was really fascinating. And I love how you brought that up. But also with your environment. So I'm staying with my grandmother, and she likes everything very neat and clean, but it doesn't have to be organized a specific way. Versus me, the towels have to be folded a certain way, put the green towels with the green towels, the brown towels with the brown towels. Mm-hmm. So I didn't realize that that is a piece of my perfectionism where it does bring me anxiety when something is out of place and not put together, because that's how I kind of want people to perceive me, is put together perfect. So I'm learning a lot. I'm just
Absolutely. And I think and people have a tendency to latch onto things that they feel there's a little bit more control in, right? So things like the way your makeup looks, or the outfit that you're wearing, or the towels, or how your home looks. Those are things that people have a tendency to feel there's more control over, right? And so that is an easy place for your perfectionism to really latch onto.
yes.
Yeah.
Especially when life starts to feel out of control as you get older and around that college age. And I mean, that's really my experience. So that's what I can speak on.
Sure.
But around that college age where suddenly life is completely out of control because you have to figure out who you want to be. It's no longer dictated to you to be at class at a certain time, go to lunch at this time, go to sports, go home, go to sleep. There's none of that anymore. All of a sudden, you have to be in charge of making your own class schedule. You can choose classes at 8 a.m. or at 12 p.m. You can choose to be in class for 8 hours a day or just one class a day for 2 hours. All of a sudden, there's all these choices. You have to figure out what degree you want. It's up to you if you're going to go out and exercise, if you're going to eat healthy, you have to cook, or if you're going to buy out. There's nothing really feels like it's controlled anymore.
Yep.
So for me, that's where a lot of my lack of control stem from, and I would grasp onto any piece that I could control.
Yes.
So like healthy eating, and I could control what I was eating. So I was very, very particular about that because I couldn't control how my teachers were going to do their exams, because in high school things were a lot more straightforward versus college. It's like a lecture, but the test is on a textbook.
Yep. Absolutely. And I think that I think that perception of control, right, obviously is comforting in a lot of ways. And then there definitely is a tipping point where it's then again sort of this added stress, that is probably not necessary, but also not helpful in that way. Yeah.
Exactly. So those of us who are labeled as perfectionists often don't understand where it comes from. So I know we talked a little bit about control, but what are some of the other root causes of perfectionism?
Gosh, this is such a great question and really multifaceted. I think what I have seen in most of my, sort of clinical experience is that a lot of times people with that perfectionist type of personality grow up surrounded by either parents or caretakers, or even like a society or community that tends to have really high standards and possibly even some unrealistic expectations, right? So there's this sense that you must be a certain way in order for you to be either loved or worthy, or to prove your worth, right? So you're not necessarily just accepted for, who you are and your strengths, but in a way, your achievements are somehow tied to your self-worth, right? And I would say that is, and that's not all the time the fault of, say, the parents or the caregivers. Sometimes there is a perfectionism that could be self-driven as well, right? Or even just really influenced by society or media, that really gets in the way of developing maybe like a really steady sense of self-esteem and self-worth, in the true definition, which is where you're able to embrace yourself for your strengths and also your weaknesses, and realize, hey, you know what? That's still good enough. Like, I'm still good enough. When I look at caregivers and parents, there definitely are some parents. I live in New York City, and so there's a lot of very driven, just it's a fast culture, right? And so there are a lot of people who come from very successful families who have successful, parents, and there is a standard that's just set for them. Hey, I want to live up to my parents, or at least meet that standard that they've hit. And so because of that, there is this unspoken, pressure or expectation to get to that point. I think sometimes perfectionist personalities are also modeled by perfectionist parents, right? So those parents that might have a tendency to be a certain way, without even realizing what they're doing, are instilling these values and this type of ideal into their children without even knowing that that's what they're doing. A really easy, concrete example of this are parents that have graduated from, the top Ivy League schools, right? There is oftentimes, I'm not saying all the time, but oftentimes there's this innate pressure for the kids to then have to go to those, really competitive, hard schools. My parents went there. It's like, I of course have to go there, or at least something comparable to, right?
Yeah.
And then I think there are cultures that kids may grow up in that are somewhat chaotic or kind of overwhelmed in the household. And because of that, there's this need for control. And the kids want to either help their parents out in some way by not rocking the boat, or they want to find that control so that they can feel a sense of safety that they might not be able to have. And so there is this, there could really be, I think these are patterns that are oftentimes set in those early years, and then obviously continue throughout most of their adult life. And I think, there is an innate fear of disapproval or negative judgment from others, and this innate sense of insecurity or inadequacy that I think for various reasons has developed.
Yes. And it's funny how everything you described is how our environment at a young age affects who we are. And that happens in so many different areas, not just with perfectionism, but we don't realize that those early years are really, really impactful, and they make a difference in who we're going to be. So being mindful and aware of that, which I don't think most people are, they don't realize that even though I'm just trying to do what's best for my kid and give them the best example, and that's my intention, paying attention to how your intention is actually being perceived by the kid.
So I think that's a great point, because I think when I do parenting work, one of the things that I always remind these parents are, your voice is what often gets internalized in your children, right? And I'm sure, like, we can all think about our internalized voices often sound a little familiar, if you think about it. I think even for myself, I think some of my perfectionist qualities came from, I had grandparents around me that when I was growing up were very much a part of my youth and my early development. And my grandfather was a complete perfectionist. I mean, he, truly, you can't, one of the things that I remember about him is, I'm in elementary school, we're doing book reports. And he would always say to me, your book report needs to have a cover page. Now, the teacher never said we needed a cover page, but, he would sit down with me and, we would take a piece of construction paper and I would have to draw a picture and make a cover page and then slide it in one of those like clear plastic binder things and hand it in. I mean, that's over and beyond, right? Obviously what was expected. And sure, did it teach me some good things? Absolutely. But also, did it set the tone for other things? Absolutely. And even in my own parenting now with my kids, one of the things that I always say is, it's a joke, but it's in jest, but it is, I think there's like a higher meaning to it, which is, our family motto is never to do the bare minimum, but do the bare maximum. And it's not, obviously I'm going to have expectations for my child. It's not that I'm just going to say, I don't expect anything from you, I think, I do have expectations for him because I want him to be a good human being, have a good life, all these things. But I do not want him to feel like, we always have to do that perfectionist standard, in life. And so, absolutely. I think, the critical voice that we hear growing up then becomes our harsh inner critic.
That is so true. And being able to recognize that and change that tone with your children is absolutely amazing. Now, I'm sure plenty of people listening now are starting to question, like, am I a perfectionist, or am I leading my kids to be perfectionists? Is this okay? We always get to that point because you recognize things within yourself. So what are some of these warning signs that, maybe I am struggling with perfectionism or projecting it on? Should I seek professional help?
That's a great question. So I think, one of the early signs of perfectionism really getting in the way is burnout. So when somebody really feels like I feel so burnt out, I don't have space for anything else, signs of work-life balance being off, signs of the small little things in life are, your cup is so full, once that little thing drops in, it's overflowing, right? Those are signs that, hey, this is really getting in the way of you being able to not only be effective, but obviously be, at peace or happy with what's happening in your life. And so that often leads to things like depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts. I've definitely seen people come in with panic attacks because there's such a high level of anxiety. Obviously there's a lot more added stress that's not necessary. And stress, as we know, leads to health problems. Sometimes there's eating disorders, self-esteem issues that are also kind of mixed all into there. Even some OCD-like traits, or this idea that you're just spending too much time and energy ruminating on things or thinking about things too much. And really just being tired of living your life in that way and just putting so much effort, so much energy into these things that in the end probably don't really matter that much.
Yes, those are all great warning signs to recognize, because when it starts to impair your daily activities, when it is a constant thought in your head and you can't stop, you can't slow down, you can't allow yourself to sleep, that is a really important warning sign that, hey, it might be time to reach out for support. Mm-hmm. And there is really no shame in getting support, no matter what society around has told you. And a lot of people really don't have access to therapy, which is so sad, but they feel like there's nothing else that they can do. So what are some ways that someone who is experiencing perfectionist characteristics can support themselves if they can't afford therapy?
That's a great question. What I will say is that there are some really wonderful self-help books out there. Probably one of my favorites is one, actually I have it. Can I show it?
Yes.
Okay. This is probably one of my favorite ones. And it does a great job, I think, being thorough enough, to kind of lead you down that right path and to start the steps that are necessary to really not only recognize the traits, but also figuring out how do we overcome them. And so I think this is one of my favorite ones that I actually do use with my clients sometimes too, really? Even though, it's a supplement to obviously what we're doing in terms of therapy, but it's a great one. It's a great one. I think another one that is a little bit more pop psychology-ish, I would say, but an entertaining read, but also practical, is this one.
How to be an imperfectionist. Oh, I love that.
Yes. And so this one's by Stephen Guise. He's he wrote a book called Mini Habits. It was a New York Times bestseller, but he basically talks about his own experience and journey through perfectionism. And like I said, he does a nice balance of making it entertaining, but then also practical and self-help-ish in the end. He's not a therapist, a trained therapist, but he's basically done a lot of research in terms of, how to sort of make it work. So I guess this one's like a little bit more coachy, whereas this one is definitely, based on CBT, actual techniques. The other thing I would say is, this might sound almost too simplistic, but it actually does really help. Any of my clients that deal with any sort of anxiety, and the perfectionist anxiety, it is a type of anxiety. Cardio and exercise are one of the best things that you can do. It's just another way to release that overabundance of kind of like anxious energy that you might be holding in your body. So, like I said, sounds so simple, but it's a solution and it works. It's scientifically backed and proven too. And then the other thing that I would say is, one of my new favorite books is by Brene Brown, who I'm sure a lot of you have heard about, right? She's she really bridges that gap between academic work and real research with sort of making it digestible for the masses. She wrote a book called The Gift of Imperfection. And that's actually a really great book to start off with too.
Okay, I'm buying that book. I'm excited. But also exercise, cardio and exercise. I don't think that people understand how helpful it is when your thoughts are racing and you can't calm down. And for some reason, like racing on the treadmill helps calm those racing thoughts. It's like your body doesn't want to do both. Mm-hmm. But that has been a go-to for me. So I love that you brought that up and that it's backed in science.
Absolutely. I mean, it is, I always say when you're too much in your head, get into your body. It's the quickest way. If you're in your head, get into your body. And it absolutely releases those. I mean, even from a hormonal level, it releases all of the hormones that are going to help you relax and actually be happy, or at least more happy.
Exactly. So you have been absolutely amazing, Dr. Chung, and I am so excited to have had this conversation with you. Before we wrap up, would you mind sharing 3 action items for someone who is a perfectionist to begin a journey of recovery where that perfectionism doesn't control their life?
Absolutely. So I would say my 3 top tips, right, are, really watch out for the shoulds. So stop shooting on yourself and really watch out for that. That includes things like the negative self-talk and the negative scripts that we might be, kind of are just like almost like broken recording in our head. So just kind of really noticing them. And when you notice them, what I want you to do is, almost like just try and stop yourself in your tracks in that moment, and then bring yourself back to, the present moment. You could be focusing on your breath or just noticing objects that are in the room. And then what I want you to do is to move your attention away from those negative thoughts and either find something positive that you can focus on, or go to something that's actionable, like an item that's actually actionable that you can do to, move forward in any sort of way. The other thing is, I mean, this sounds funny, but timers are really great to use, especially because, we were talking about inefficiency in some ways, right? Perfectionism creates that inefficiency in time because you're spending way more time than you need to on certain things. So instead, what you do is you don't set the standard to stop based on quality. You're doing it based on quantity or time, right? So if you're going to write that paper, just say, I'm going to finish as much as I can within an hour, instead of, just saying, I'm going to finish this when I feel good about it. that could even be about decisions, because sometimes perfectionists have a really hard time making decisions, right? Because there's this fear of making the wrong decision, or even, this sounds funny, but the fear of not making the best decision also, can make it really difficult. And so being able to set a time for yourself of like, I'm going to make a decision in 3 minutes, and you just weigh it out as much as you can, and then you go with where you land at that moment. So timers are a great thing. I don't know if, I think there are lots of good apps for that too, which I really love. One of my favorites is something called the Forest app. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I have not.
But it's it also helps with the Pomodoro method of working, which is, just kind of increasing efficiency. But I love it because there's these little virtual trees and bushes that you plant in a virtual forest. And every time that you make a decision or you do something and just stick to the time limit, that virtual tree or bush gets planted in your forest. And when you get enough of them, they actually plant a real tree in real life for you. So there's this like really nice thing that happens with it. And then I would say the third thing to try is, this is easier said than done, but it's to practice making, not making mistakes, but doing things not perfectly. Now, this speaks to exposure work. Because I think that there is a way in which changing our thoughts and our emotions are important, but exposure is also a huge piece here that can really help by this is the piece that basically embeds in you, in your like gut of, I actually can make mistakes and still be okay. I can make mistakes or not do things to that impossible standard, and I'm still a good enough person. So really starting with small little things. Like, some of the things that I work with people on are these kind of creating these hierarchies and mini exposures to help them relearn. You're basically relearning these things, right? That you've been, that's been drilled into your mind. And one of the things that we might start off with is, something as small as misspelling something in an email, and just kind of doing it on purpose and seeing what that's like, or a little bit higher than that is maybe, calling, using a wrong word or calling somebody by the wrong name, and still, and then being like, oh, so sorry. Like, of course I know your name. It's, Bob or whatever, but, at least doing that and seeing what that feels like, you survived it. You're okay. So really trying to take some of those chances, and even for people that might be parents out there, it's about modeling it for their children too. You can make mistakes and the world's not going to fall apart. You're totally fine.
That is amazing advice, number one. But I have to say, with the practicing activities, I don't think I'd be able to handle that, because there is so much fear messing up. And I love that you take it in small steps, and it's like, the world didn't end. Now let's try something bigger, and learning that it's okay to make mistakes. I know that's one of my biggest fears. And right away I was like, this is giving me anxiety, just the idea of it. I could feel my heart racing. So I love how you shared just the tier of it as well, and not just throwing yourself in too fast.
I think that's really the trick, is about really finding what's right at that cusp, where it makes you feel uncomfortable, but you're still kind of able to do it. I think, one of the things is when I started my Instagram site, this is one of the things that I learned is that, inevitably, there's like a misspelling that usually happens. Right. And, all of a sudden I'm like, oh, and of course I figure it out like days later. And then all of this, self-critical thoughts and shame and, everything just kind of comes rushing in. And then, few days later, like I survived it. No one is calling it out. I don't even know how many people noticed it. Maybe some people did, maybe some people didn't, but I feel like, even something like that, obviously it wasn't purposeful, but it's a great example of how, that kind of happened. I'm like, okay, you know what? We're okay.
We did it.
We did it. Yeah.
Dr. Chung, you have been beyond amazing, so educational, so informational, so lighthearted, and just vulnerable and able to connect with. I really enjoyed having this conversation with you. Thank you so much.
Of course, I've really enjoyed being here with you as well. And I always enjoy our conversations together. So I look forward to the next one.